Imagine you find the absolute perfect apartment. It's cheap, it's in a great location, it's got everything you could ever need. Now imagine the person who lived there before you left something behind. Something ancient, furious, and weaponized. Well, this is the true story of how a dream flat in Jaipur turned into a waking nightmare.
You know, it's a terrifying thought, right? It's one of those things we just don't let ourselves think about when we're signing a lease. But for one young woman in the busy city of Jaipur, this question wasn't just hypothetical. It became her horrifying reality. So let's get into it. Her story starts with a 22-year-old woman named Ananya. And like a lot of young people, she moved from her small town to the big city of Jaipur for a brand new job, just full of hope and excitement for this next chapter of her life.
And she found what seemed like the perfect place. It was a flat that was just impossibly cheap and only minutes away from her new office. But there were some red flags, like right away. The other people living in the building were unsettling. They would just stare at her, totally silent as she walked by. And even weirder, every single maid she tried to hire flat out refused the job. Ananya felt this little knot of unease in her stomach, but she pushed it down. A deal this good, it was just too hard to pass up.
Well, that initial unease didn't take long to grow into something way, way more sinister. And it didn't start with a bang, but with a whimper, a sound that would end up haunting her every waking moment. It all began during a late-night phone call with her friend Mira. Right in the middle of their conversation, Mira just asks, "Anu, where is that sound of a child crying coming from?" Ananya went quiet. She's listening, but she hears absolutely nothing. She just chalked it up to a bad connection. But then, it kept happening. This whole phenomenon was so bizarre and it was so consistent. Every single person who called Ananya at night ended up asking the exact same question. Over the phone, they could hear a child wailing, clear as day. But inside the flat, for Ananya, there was just complete silence. The sound existed for everyone but her. How is that even possible? And then, one night, this silence was shattered. At 1 o'clock in the morning, Ananya was jolted awake by the unmistakable, loud sobbing of a small child. But the absolute second she opened her eyes, the sound just vanished. She called out, "Who's there?" But there was no answer. And then, she heard a faint giggle, almost like someone was mocking her. And that's when she saw it. Peeking out from behind her bedroom door was a tiny little child. The moment their eyes met, it just darted away. Ananya, terrified, chased after it, but there was no one there. And when she went back to her room, her blood ran cold. On her mirror were the bloody handprints of a small child. This wasn't just a sound anymore. Okay, so after that, completely shaken, Anya finally went and confronted her weird, silent neighbors the next morning. And the story they told her, it revealed a history for that flat that was so much more gruesome than she could have ever imagined. The tenant before her, they told her, was an old woman who practiced black magic. And apparently, a dark cloud just hung over her. Anytime a neighbor had some good fortune, a new car, a promotion, tragedy would strike them instead. People saw her stealing children and, horribly, even digging up a corpse from a local cemetery. When the society secretary finally got the nerve to confront her, he was found murdered, decapitated, his body covered in the scratch marks of a small child. And after she was finally forced to leave, a search of the flat uncovered a child's skeleton hidden inside the walls. And while they were telling her this story, the neighbors mentioned a terrifying name, a kacha kawa. They whispered that the old woman had created one to murder the secretary. With that chilling name just echoing in her mind, a terrified Ananya ran back to her flat and went online, desperate to figure out exactly what she was up against. So what she learned is that a kacha kalwa is one of the most feared entities in all of Indian dark folklore. It's the enslaved soul of an infant, a child who died before its first birthday, that's been weaponized by a practitioner of black magic. And the process she read about, it's stomach-turning. See, because infants are often buried instead of cremated, a black magic practitioner, a tantric, can actually dig up the corpse. Then, through these dark, awful rituals performed on the body, the child's innocent soul gets twisted, enslaved, and forced to carry out the most evil commands imaginable. Anyanya's blood ran cold. She wasn't living with a ghost, she was living with a weapon. So armed with this horrifying knowledge, Ananya knew she had to get out, and get out immediately. She made a plan to pack up and leave first thing in the morning. But the spirit in that flat, it had other plans for her final night.
Just as she was trying to process everything she'd learned, the lights in the entire apartment just flickered and died, plunging her into absolute, total darkness.
And in that instant, she couldn't breathe. It felt like a pair of hands were wrapped tightly around her throat, just choking the life right out of her. In a complete panic, she stumbled towards the kitchen to try and get a glass of water.
As she was fumbling around in the dark, she caught her own reflection in the kitchen window. And there, clear as day, were the marks of tiny little fingers, bruised right into her neck. Someone, or something, had just physically attacked her.
Just then, a loud wail came from her bedroom. She looked toward the sound, her eyes starting to adjust to the dark. And then she saw it. Slowly, two small hands emerged from the top of her cupboard, followed by the face of a child. But its body looked rotten, its teeth were sharp like needles, and its fingernails were long and black. It was the kacha-kalwa. It gave her this terrible smile, and then it leaped at her. Ananya screamed and just ran for the door, fumbling with the lock. She bolted for the elevator, but the power was out. It was useless. She glanced back and saw that horrific creature standing in her living room, slowly, deliberately, just walking towards her. She ran for the stairs, her breath catching in her throat, and she did not stop until she reached the society's main gate.
The security guard saw how panicked she was, and, probably assuming a burglar had broken in, he bravely ran upstairs toward her flat to help. Ananya tried to scream a warning, to tell him to stop, but it was too late. Seconds later, a blood-curdling scream echoed from the building.
Ananya turned around just in time to see the guard's body being thrown from her balcony, crashing to the ground below. And standing there on the balcony, looking right down at her, was the kacha-kalwa. But this time, blood was pouring from its eyes. The very next day, a priest was called in. He confirmed that while the old woman was gone, the malevolent spirit she had created was still trapped in the flat. Ananya packed whatever she could and left that very day, without ever looking back. The apartment was permanently sealed, and while she never saw the creature again, the memory and the sound of a crying child haunts her to this very day. Which really just leaves us with one final, chilling thought. They sealed the doors, they chained the windows, but can you really imprison something that was never truly alive to begin with? It's something to think about the next time you hear a strange noise in a quiet room. Thanks for joining me.